And breaking tonight, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said any compromises with Russia will need to be put to a referendum in Ukraine. It comes as Russian attacks continue, with reports that at least 8 people have been killed after a shopping centre and a number of houses were shelled in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. Elsewhere, in the besieged city of Mariupol, local officials say at least 2,300 residents have now been killed, and about 90% of residential buildings are either damaged or totally destroyed. As the atrocities rack up, President Zelenskyy says negotiations with Russia are the only way to avoid a third world war. But some compromises simply can't be made. He has ruled out Russian demands that Crimea be recognised as part of its territory and that the breakaway regions of Donetsk and Luhansk be acknowledged as independent republics, along with the guarantee that Ukraine will never become a NATO member. Meanwhile, Moscow has accused Kiev of stalling peace talks by making proposals unacceptable for Russia. So, with both sides at a stalemate, should Zelenskyy compromise if it means getting a ceasefire? Send in your thoughts to Dan at gbnews.uk. Tweet them to me at gbnews. And while you're there, vote in our very close Twitter poll. But weighing in on this is the former advisor to the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Cormac Smith, Ukrainian MP and deputy head of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, Defence and Intelligence, Mariana Bezula, and former SAS trooper Phil Campion, who has recently returned from Ukraine. So, Mariana, let me start with you. In Ukraine, you're a member of Zelensky's party. Is it not wise for him to compromise just a little bit in order to stop this terrible destruction?
You see, there is no way to compromise which is about the Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial aspects. We cannot be in compromise with it. And it's a principle, so it's clear. And of course, the end of war, it's about compromise. But everything which will be or can be compromised additionally, and which is very questionable for our nation, of course, it's a part of discussion in our referendum. And the president said it. But maybe it's obvious, but I need to emphasize where I'm sitting. I'm sitting in the capital, and the light is dark because I cannot switch it on because we have shelling.
I know.
So, and in those circumstances, in about months, yes, you showed it was previous night, and this night I hope will be calm, but I doubt. Previous night, even in the capital, were destroyed 6 houses, very modern and just regular for British people. Also, shopping center was damaged, to schoolhouses, and we have it such nightmare every day. So
no, Mariana, I know.
Having this month, I'm sorry, I will finish. Having this month,
yes,
with all the deaths and damage, Ukrainian nation is not about to compromise about principal things. So, and the president as a leader is also about this. So, what about our sovereignty? It's a principle.
No, I get that. You've made that point very clearly. And as I have been saying for these past 3 weeks, the bravery of the Ukrainian people has blown me away. And Cormac Smith, I guess the point that I would make on this is that Ukraine has already won in a lot of ways. If you look at what Putin is now potentially prepared to accept, if you'd told him 4 weeks ago this is what he would get from the war, he would have said absolutely not. But it's worth a little bit of compromise, is it not, in order to stop this terrible shelling that Mariana refers to?
No, I don't think Ukraine has not won yet. Ukraine has certainly had a number of very impressive victories and recently pushing Russian forces back north of Kyiv. But, you know, I can't really add an awful lot to what Mariana has just said. And before, in preparation for this call, I had a conversation with 3 very senior Ukrainian diplomats just to check. I actually find that it's amazing that we're actually having a discussion about what concessions Ukraine should make. Vladimir Putin is the Hitler of the 21st century. When I was in Ukraine serving the Ministry of Foreign Affairs between 2016 and 2018, many Ukrainian friends told me that Putin wants Ukraine without Ukrainians. And I didn't quite believe it at the time. The whole world is saying, and I've been saying for 6 years, that the world needs to see Putin and Russia, because it's not just Putin, Russia through Ukrainian eyes. Too late, we're waking up and starting to see the world through Ukrainian eyes. So we're here discussing what concessions Ukraine should make. What concessions are Russia going to make to stop being made a pariah state on the face of the earth for the next 50 or 100 years? How do we go about denazifying Russia? These are the questions we have to be asked. The country that invaded an innocent, peaceful, democratic country. Remember, and the viewers need to remember, for all of the smoke screens of NATO membership and denazification and everything else, these were all lies from the country that lies on an industrial scale. Putin hates Ukraine and Ukrainians with a passion because they have had the audacity to turn their back on Russia democratically, and every time a corrupt president tried to bring them back towards Russia, they rose up first in the Orange Revolution and then in the Maidan Revolution to take the country on the westward path. Putin hates this. He hates the Ukrainian people for doing it, and he fears it more than anything else because there is no greater threat.
No, very powerful words, and I understand that point.
We need to ask, Dan, sorry, I'll just finish.
Yes.
I think we need to ask, what concessions are Russia going to make?
Yeah.
Because I can add nothing
I
to
get
what
that, but I would argue, Phil Campion, they have already made a hell of a load of concessions because this is not where Putin was expecting to end the war. But look, you're just back, Phil, from Ukraine. Tell me what you experienced over there and what your take on this is.
Right, first of all, I'm going to point out in all of this, I'm not a politician, okay? So my views are very much...
That's why we like you, Phil.
Okay? I've been to Ukraine on a humanitarian gig, you know what I mean? And personally, I would give any assistance I could, and that comes without saying, but from a soldier's point of view. I absolutely have been so impressed with the Ukrainian people, the way that I've seen farmers digging trenches, the way I've seen normal people stacked up, waiting to go up against a Russian force, which quite, from my point of view, are being completely out of order, all right? And Putin is pulling off some absolutely disgusting, honking, horrible tactics to try and get these people to the table. The trouble is, from my point of view, that is only going to get worse. And so... as much as I don't ever want to even intimate that the Ukrainian people should compromise, I do still try and think that a solution should be found across the table to stop the normal, brave people who actually, you know, have had no part or say in any of this from suffering anymore. And it's really difficult because I can see the fight and the determination in the Ukraine people's eyes, and I've got nothing but respect for them. I just wish there was some diplomatic solution to this, which would, you know, alleviate. And sometimes you think, well, making a small concession somewhere might not be losing. You might have to lose a battle to win the war, is where I'm coming from. Do you know what I mean? You might there might be some way tactically round saying, you know, we can rob Peter to pay Paul. Putin wants a way out of this. Putin needs to try and walk away from here. With some sort of...
he's losing. Okay, well, look, let me get Mariana to respond to that, Phil, if that's okay. Mariana, how would you respond?
What do you mean? I said about that the principle is our sovereignty. I also said that, of course, the end of war is always compromise. but the compromise should not be against the principles that are main for our nation. So it can be some guarantees of security. It can be even discussions about political positioning, but very careful and according to all that course, all that choice that Ukraine had before, and we paid this for our choice and this freedom of choice. As I emphasized previously, having almost months of the war, having so many deaths and so many destructions, at least I can even make some examples. Speaking about the date of 20th of March, we had 1,660 buildings destroyed, and among about 490 schools and kindergartens.
Oh, it's barbaric. It makes me sick.
170 different medical buildings, 170, 15,000 of kilometers of roads, and 350 different bridges. 15 airports.
And Mariana, it is those statistics that make me so passionate about trying to stop the shelling as quickly as possible, because, of course, I want a Ukraine for you to all come back to. But look, Cormac, I'm going to give you the final word. What are you hearing about the state of the negotiations? Zelenskyy offering to meet Putin face-to-face. It does feel like both men do want a deal, but what are you hearing, Cormac?
No. And I think Marianne will agree with me. And, and the first thing I'd like to say, with the absolute utmost of respect to Phil, for what you've done, sir, and particularly for what you're doing in the humanitarian thing. And I want to make that very clear. But the one thing that I learned in my time in Ukraine was a lesson, actually, that, diplomats and politicians have dealt with Russia over the decades have learned. You cannot trust Russia. There is no diplomatic solution with Russia. Russia understands only power and strength. So therefore, I mean, my observation, and this is from the outside, because yes, I may have friends in Kyiv, but I'm not a member of the largest party in the Rada, so I defer to Mariana. However, the one thing that I know is Zelenskyy is keeping the moral high ground. He is making every effort to engage with Putin reasonably. Right, and he has made it very, very clear. It was interesting. I listened to Ivana Klimpush, former vice and prime minister, the other night, saying, that Mr. Zelenskyy cannot make a decision that the Ukrainian people will not support. And indeed, Mr. Zelenskyy has said that any agreement must go to a referendum.
No, and I understand that, and I think that's a good compromise.
You cannot trust the Russians.
No, and I hear that loud and clear.
Have very, very little faith of any negotiations getting a reasonable.
Well, thank you to you all. Fascinating points of view. That was former advisor to the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Cormac Smith, the Ukrainian MP, deputy head of the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, Defence and Intelligence, Mariana Bizula, joining us, of course, from Ukraine, and the former SAS trooper Phil Campion, who's just returned from Ukraine. So who do you agree with? This is an interesting one. Raymond on Twitter says, if Zelenskyy doesn't compromise, then Putin will simply destroy Ukraine. From Sean, yes, he should compromise. Perhaps we should give peace a chance for a change. But Bet, via email, says, why should the president of Ukraine give up any territories to appease Russia's illegal invasion? Imagine an enemy invading Britain and taking Kent. Do we say you can have it if you leave the rest? What nonsense. And your verdict is now in, and it's a fascinating one. You're completely split on this, as I expected. 49% of you agree that Zelenskyy should look for a compromise with Putin, while 51% of you say absolutely not. And we'll, of course, keep on this story all week.